All right, we are here today with Lev Abramovich. This is Lev's second time on the podcast. The first time was when we thought mandamus was over. You can listen to that episode in episode 85 of the podcast, Security Delays, Study Permits, and Mandamus.
We thought
Um,
mandamus was over.
well, we thought that the Chen decision was going to significantly
Oh,
complicate it. And if you're not sure what we're talking about, you can go listen to that episode. This episode might also come, I assume, is will be, given what we're talking about, as a bit of a follow-up to episode 96, which was inadmissibility for espionage and Chinese immigration with Will Tao. So if what we talk about today is of interest, if you want to hear more discussions about this, you can check out those two episodes. Lev is someone who does, I think it's safe to say, a lot of mandamus applications and has also um, seen both further procedural fairness letters as well as refusals, I believe, on foreign nationals, predominantly Chinese, on this issue of espionage. So, Lev, thanks for coming back on.
Thank you, Stu and
And
Diana.
what have you been seeing?
Mixture of things. With respect to mandamus, we can start there. I think mandamus is here to stay because delays are, I think, only going to get worse as we're become more and more concerned with our national security. And I think without proper funding, training, better systems, delays are going to continue to be just a feature. I think I've seen cases where it takes about 2 years to get a security decision on a Chinese application, Chinese student application, where the student has never worked before. So basically, they're doing some Googling, they're looking at the university, they're looking at his thesis papers, et cetera, and then they're saying, well, in the future, you may wake up one day to find yourself in a scenario where China is pressuring you to commit espionage, irrespective of the fact that you're actually working in an open area and everything is published, and the possibility of espionage seems, in a classical sense, seems to be quite minute. So mandamus is here to stay, I think. But I do think that the judges who are looking at mandamus applications are becoming more conservative, more restrictive, particularly on the security side of things. We recently had a couple of leave decisions. So our overall leave rate, production orders plus leave granted versus dismissals, is around 80%. So, and we're doing large numbers, like I don't know, we're going to do 350 applications a year or something like that. Just mandamuses. So, we have a decent sort of pool, if you will. And in the last couple of weeks, we got a couple of leave dismissals, one Chinese, one Russian, no, both security delays, both around the 2-year mark. I mean, one was like 16 months, one was close to 2 years for a tourist visa for a grandparent. And I think certain judges are essentially putting themselves almost like into the security apparatus and saying, okay, I see China, I see security delay, I'm going to dismiss this, even though the test for leave is, an arguable case. It's quite a low case. It's quite a low threshold. And that is somewhat concerning. On the whole, mandamus does seem to be continue, like it seems to continue to be an effective remedy. We are seeing decisions, and that's kind of where things stand. And I can speak a little bit more about espionage and so on as we progress.
mhm.
Well,
To
so let's,
me,
yep,
to
go
me,
for it.
law always tells a story, and so the way that this mandamus story for me tracks is that the epidemic of mandamus began during the pandemic, and really at that point, I think we were all attributing the delay to the pandemic, that like remote workspace and therefore nobody could do the job, and they were telling us it was all about privacy concerns, and I think we went along with that, and maybe that indeed was the reason for the slowdown. We also attributed it to some extent to AI, and to some extent that was indeed perhaps the case. They were transitioning to an artificial intelligence based system, and that caused some hiccups and a lot of bad decisions and all that sort of thing. But I think more and more what we are seeing, this isn't just process related delays, it's politically motivated delays, in the sense that like the proliferation of decisions around higher level inadmissibility, organized criminality, security criminality, human rights type based inadmissibilities is a huge uptick. And so I think what we're dealing with is this like triptych of AI, the influence of AI, the influence of like the use of the machine kind of decision making over the human workforce ones, still working in more of a remote environment and the privacy concerns related, and then this uptick of the political. And I think that I'm sort of interested in unpacking how each of those things have contributed it to it, and like really pointing the finger at like what are the political motivated things, like why are we seeing China, all these allegations of espionage from China, like even like from the Soviet on the Soviet side, you know, like all of those kinds of security related allegations. I think I'm starting to see them even from Israel as well, you know, much more deep, looking into people's military history, even from the Philippines as well, you know, just like kind of unpacking some of those stories.
That, I mean, on our podcast kind of tells that story as well, right? Like I think the
Totally.
episode we had with Lev last year, we were talking about how there were these big security screening delays, primarily for Chinese nationals, and we didn't really understand why or what they were looking for.
Totally.
And then the Lee decision came down in January, and
Aha.
we now have a much better idea as to what they're looking for, sort of, because it's still not clear what exactly they are looking for, because it's not the case that everyone is delayed from China. Um, and I guess I have two questions for both of you would be first, Lev, maybe you can elaborate on what type of cases and scenarios you're seeing where espionage is being raised. And second, this is maybe a question for both of you. Something that has sort of puzzled me is Lee came down in January, expanding the definition of what constitutes espionage to include, as one of you mentioned, cases where someone may be coerced in the future to go back, or not even go back, but just to provide information, including publicly available information, to someone from their country of origin or citizenship, or even just a third party country. Are you surprised that there hasn't been a subsequent decision yet on this topic? Because I check the federal court every day and I've been surprised. So why don't we start, yeah, with Lev? Maybe you can say what you've been seeing and then we can discuss why hasn't there been another decision since Lee?
Yeah, so let's maybe start with the lead decision, and I think I just want to unpack a little bit about how I think this sort of came about. And I was speaking to Raymond about this a little bit as well.
Raymond was the
And
lawyer in Lee for those who
Yeah, Raymond was the lawyer in Lee. And I think, by the way, he did a great job. I just think sort of the luck of the draw, and just as Crampton was, I think, seeking specifically to take charge and to extend the definition. And I think he was seeing himself as sort of protecting our national interest
Hmm.
in some way. And in some way, I think he did that because he perhaps saw that the security apparatus was broken, that we weren't coming up with individualized assessments and decisions, that we didn't have a broad security policy, like, for example, US had with Declaration 1043, which we previously spoke about, which you can critique, but at least it's transparent and at least it lets people know where the US stands with respect to student visas for Chinese nationals who have attended certain institutions. And I think because sort of in the vacuum, and considering our sort of security failures, if you will, and certain level of naivete more broadly, the Lee decision comes out in that context. But I think the court is almost trying to supplement, protect, is almost placing itself within our sort of broader legislative apparatus, if you will. And I see the Lee decision as being problematic on a number of fronts, and I think it could be critiqued, and I don't know if you'd agree with me, but from the standpoint that is, it's almost ultra-virus in a way, vis-a-vis IRCC officers are now creating a national defense policy in some way. I'm not sure it's within their prerogative or within their jurisdiction. We can talk about that. But I think what we're seeing now, and we're going to talk about the interference requiring, we're now seeing broad scale changes being introduced. And had we been aware and alive and actually active with respect to foreign interference and this sort of globalized but deglobalizing world, if you will, then maybe the Lee decision doesn't happen, because we would have just had a broad policy like the US, which said you're not coming in because of certain considerations, and the court didn't need to extend the definition of espionage. So something to consider, something to ponder. With respect to what we're seeing on the espionage front, so I think it's important to understand that the part of CISIS that does security assessment is not the same part that is on the operational side of things. Like as far as I understand, those are not the same agents who will pursue an active investigation with respect to, let's say, an Iranian or Chinese asset. And I think there's a demarcation there between those who are sort of sitting in an office and Googling, you know, this institute and doing research, and those who are actually doing field work. That's my understanding from sort of doing some research on that. And I
Can you
think,
pause there for a minute and
yeah,
explain what you mean? Like, so are you saying that like CSIS would look at somebody who's actually conducted like acts of terrorism and
I,
institutions that are somehow entrenched?
no, what I'm
Is
saying
that what
is
you mean?
my understanding is that CISIS, like every large organization, has departments and divisions and so on. One of
Right.
them does immigration security screenings. Steve is the king of ATIP requests, and he may provide further information here. There's another operational or what we could call maybe like a field division that deals with actual live investigations, if you will, as opposed to security, immigration-related security screenings. I'm not saying the two cannot overlap, but my understanding is that most of the immigration stuff is not necessarily passed on to, I guess we'll call it the operational branch, if you will. It's done within a specific department that's primarily, as we know, is paper-based. It's primarily, from what we're seeing, it's basically open source, and you know, it's conducted based on reviewing information presented by our allies, primarily Australia, the US. And that department is not necessarily the department that does more of the active and sort of more of the interesting work. And I think that what they're doing is they're, like I said, in some way implementing a broader national security policy, which we have not actually sort of, there was never a public consultation which said, like, we have decided that a large
Mm.
class of Chinese nationals just cannot come to Canada as a matter of principle. Now,
Mm-hmm.
with respect to Section 34A, what we're seeing is that, and we'll see how the lead decision ultimately plays out in the court, but we're seeing further utilization of the lead decision. They now know that they can adopt this type of logic. And a recent case that we had was absolutely heartbreaking. It starts as a mandamus. And by the way, with most 99% of our mandamus litigation or federal court litigation, we're generally not doing the actual application initially. We retain, you know, to deal with the delay or the rejection or whatever, or at least I do that. This individual has been in Canada for 10 years. He obtained a PhD here. He worked as a researcher and I think as a postdoc. He bought a home. He has two Canadian children, and he files for PR in 2019. In 2021, he has an interview with two CSIS agents. So this is different. This is now CSIS agents. Now I know they're part of the immigration sort of division, CSIS or not, plus a third agent taking notes. He is told that the conversation is being recorded. He's never provided with a transcript or anything like that. And subsequently, we file a mandamus, and after a couple of years, he gets a PFL, which does not refer to any actual acts of espionage, which is sort of the critical part here. So after 10 years, he's not accused of actual espionage. You've done A, you've done B, you've done C.
Mm.
He is basically accused of espionage on account of his master's thesis, which he did more than 12 years ago in China. And he's now in a completely different field. So he studied hypersonic technology and then switched to low speed research in the my physicist, so it's embarrassing that I can't articulate any of this stuff. But
Mm,
this is water flow as opposed to airflow. So he switches to a different thesis. We put in the response to the PFL, including a letter from one of his academic colleagues, which says there's no opportunity for espionage here because this is sort of fundamental science. It's
mhm.
not something you can sort of espionage in, and this is not on the list of banned or concerning technologies in any event. He gets banned within 7 days of the response to the
Oh my
PFL
God.
being in after 59 months of waiting. So 10 years, and one of the things that I've argued, and this individual is so disheartened and disappointed, I don't think he wants to do anything with Canada anymore. But one of the things that I've argued is that, look, there has to be a commensurate level of, like, the standard of proof, if you will, has to be adjusted for somebody who's been in 10 years. I
Oh
understand
my
if you
God.
want to do a Chinese student and preemptively deal, but here, surely after 10 years, you should have something on this individual, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can talk to somebody after 20 years and say, you've been at PR for 20 years, wonderful, thank you for paying taxes, but we just realized that you're a software engineer and you went to a NUU and you're now banned. So we're seeing this type of stuff, which is unfortunate because, when I spoke to scientists about this in his field, some of them didn't necessarily want to participate, but they said this is absurd. This is sort of on the level of absurdity, whereby you can say I don't know, have a toothpick, you can technically use it as some sort of just doesn't make any sense. So we're seeing the lead decision as basically entrenching this sort of future concern approach, and we're seeing more and more redactions with respect to CTRs, and I know we're going to talk about that. And some of those redactions I don't really understand because it's fairly clear that all of the information is publicly available. And we're also seeing, I think, an overzealous use of Section 34(1) in general.
Mhm.
Regular army service in Ukraine,
Mhm.
in the border, for example, troop section 2 years mandatory is now Section 34(1)(f) for a Kuwait visa holder, so whole families banned, etc. So we will see how this plays out. I think you need the right facts to take a run at this, but I think in our political climate, given the interference inquiry, I think it may be tough to sort of overturn the lead decision. I think 10 years from now, we'll look at it and say that was perhaps an overstepping by the court. But I think right now in this climate where, we have an ongoing war in Ukraine, we have general instability around the world, we have the espionage inquiry, I think it may be tough to take a run at that decision.
Yeah.
That's go for it, Deanna.
You've said so much that is of so much interest. I mean, one of our colleagues, the fact pattern that you've provided, I have probably half a dozen cases, similar fact pattern at an earlier stage of proceedings where there are people that have come from China often at the age of about 18. So they graduated high school. They immediately came to Canada. They got a degree. In a scientific field, sometimes even a master's degree, Canadian work experience. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars on Canadian degrees, qualified for permanent residency, in process for permanent residency, and have waited 3-4 years for absolutely no reason other than the fact that they have a Chinese passport. This type of disparity. And so now they're bringing mandamus applications so that they can actually transition the way that everybody else in their same fact pattern, but with different passports, will have done. But it's the strangeness of having to advise people because they're being told that their applications are being held up with CSIS and with absolutely zero history of any kind of political affiliation. They were still minors for the entire time that they resided in China, or maybe for 1 year or 2 years, they started pursuing their studies there and then immediately came. And so when I'm saying, yes, we can do a mandamus application, but you have to be careful what you ask for, that you might be facing a security allegation based on the future potential for recruitment as a spy by the Chinese Communist Party. And so it is just a very strange experience as an immigration litigator to tell people that the rationale behind why they are considered a threat. And for a lot of people, it does make them lose faith in the justice system in Canada because it's just so alien to them. Many are speaking English as if it's their first language because they've done all of their adult learning in an English language environment. But again, I mean, if you want to think about an environment that cultivates extremism, it seems like that really is what we are cultivating here. Because a lot of people are like, so you don't want me after all this time? Like, after I've invested in my Canadian education, set down roots, made family ties, I would be inadmissible for life based on my future potential to affiliate with the foreign government, like the government of China, which to them is they're wanting to become permanent residents so that they can fully establish themselves in Canada. It's a very strange moment and a very weird time. Caused one of our colleagues to coin the phrase that it's become a criminal offense to do science while being Chinese. And
That
so
was me.
was it you? I thought it was
That was
Connie
me.
that came up with that
Oh,
one.
maybe it was. Maybe I just turned it into the DSWB acronym.
Do SWB. That's good. It's very strange. And once you are found inadmissible for espionage, when I say it's the highest level of inadmissibility, I mean that you're inadmissible for life in every sense. It means you cannot even visit Canada in future forever. There's no
Yeah.
humanitarian and compassionate relief. There's no right of appeal. And in future, if you apply to go anywhere else in the world, you would probably have to say, yes, I have been rejected by another country. It's Canada. They think I'm a spy, which probably means you can never go anywhere again.
Well, I would just, I mean, I've had clients who were banned and they were still issued US visas
Really?
by
Oh,
Swiss, yeah. So,
oh
you know,
my God. I wouldn't want to try and
but
have to
we
explain
get
the
lots of those
strangeness.
questions. What happens, you know, and I say, look, you got to speak to other immigration lawyers, but we've had those scenarios. Um, yeah, and I think it brings this idea of the otherness, right? We were supposed to be, you know, Canada is a nation. We have a multicultural sort of structure, and we are becoming Canadians. That doesn't mean some sort of a hegemony, but it means that we are accepting of each other. We do have some common values, and now you're being treated as the other, as this
For
potential
sure.
threat, which is also kind of concerning. And I give this speech routinely because I do lots of calls, and you know,
Me
most
too.
citizenship mandamus files are Iran, number one. China is actually, we've not done that many Chinese mandamuses on citizenship, but Iran and Middle Eastern countries, some Russia. And
Totally.
you know, when people ask me why is my application not routine, like where are you from?
For sure.
You're an engineer from Iran. Worked. Oh, I
Totally.
see.
100%.
Oh, you're
But
actually
also
working for
like
the
it,
government now.
in
Yeah.
in China, I'm seeing it also like it doesn't matter if you're a scientist. It can be like you were a nurse in a public hospital, and
We
that
have a
makes you a
couple of,
government
yeah,
employee. And so they'll ask you, send your government employment form and explain how many ranks are there between you as a nurse and the minister.
Yeah.
And they're sort of like these strange questions, as if that makes you a politician because you're a nurse in a government
Yeah.
hospital. And the
So
same things are in the Philippines. I'm seeing a lot of that.
So I'm going to read just the subject or a procedural fairness letter that one Chinese person received that they asked me to share on Twitter. And while I'm reading it, after I want to discuss two questions for you that you can think about your answers as I'm reading it. First, and these are questions that I've been asked, do you think mandamus is actually causing these findings and that people are getting punished for filing the mandamus? And second, when it comes to advising people on mandamus, are you telling people that now might not be the time and to wait for the definition of espionage to be settled? So while you think about your answers there, here's just the procedural fairness letter that someone received, which kind of just summarizes what we've been talking about. And it reads, quote, upon review of your immigration history, applications, and submissions, I have identified concerns with respect to your education, employment, and the national intelligent law of the People's Republic of China. Specifically, Article 7 states that an organization or citizen shall support, assist in, and cooperate in national intelligence work in accordance with the law and keep confidential the national intelligent work that it or he knows. The state shall protect the individual or organization that has supported, assisted in, or cooperated in national intelligence work. I find that there are reasonable grounds to believe that you would be obliged to divulge the information that you obtained or will obtain from your research and employment in Canada, specifically within the field of nanotechnology, which may be applied to military advancement with the People's Republic of China, and that it may be against Canada or that it is contrary to Canada's interests, end quote. So that gives an idea of kind of just how broad, because really that, that
Prove that
national security,
China,
that Article 7 law could apply to pretty much anyone.
anyone.
But do you think that, back to my two questions, that mandamus is causing some of these findings and that people are being punished? And is now the time to file mandamus, or are you telling some people to wait for the law on this to be settled?
Before, and maybe I can grab this one first, Diana, but
Yeah, please.
before I proceed, this particular individual was he in any way affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party or in
So I
any
don't know. It's
way?
not my client.
Okay.
It's someone else's client. He just contacted me wanting me to share his story on Twitter and wherever I could. So I don't
Great.
know the full details of the
And,
individual.
by the way, one of the things that we are sort of doing here implicitly when we send this type of letter is we're saying we are powerless in some way to protect people who are in Canada, and we don't have full jurisdiction over our security apparatus because China is so powerful they may twist people who are here, who are PRs, for citizens, and so on into some sort of compliance, and I think that's questionable. But with respect to whether mandamus has caused inadmissibility findings, so we've done, I don't know, probably more than 700 of these applications. I've had a case, where I think it was some sort of a TR visa where, we got a decision that was patently unreasonable, and the client said, "Hey, is this because of the mandamus?" I don't know. It was out of Ankara. We got a production order on the GR, but the client already got his work permit another way. But I've not seen anything in terms of a punitive approach to mandamus applications. I generally pre-screen all of my mandamus calls. I run them through Section 34. I routinely tell them not to file mandamus applications. I recently had a call with a Bangladeshi. He was in the Bangladesh army, Pakistan army. So I like here's the case law. I wouldn't necessarily recommend pushing it with a mandamus because you may just be inadmissible. This may be just a waste of money unless you want your decision. But generally speaking, I do not see a negative correlation. I say that on TR, so temporary files, where you've had maybe a rejection or two, your application is not the strongest. I'm not sure about proceeding in the mandamus with those files, but generally speaking, on PR and citizenship applications, I've not seen a negative correlation. With respect to the definition of espionage and whether now is the time to file, the issue is that if the person knew that, let's say it's going to take 2 years and I'll get my decision, sure, don't file a mandamus. But our longest file was since 2014. This person's been waiting, so 7 years or something like that. The previous record was 72 months, so it could be indefinite in some way because the security apparatus is not really functioning that well. If there was at least sort of like a metric, how during COVID I ordered a dining table and I would go into CB2's website and it would say, oh, it's moved here, it's moved there. You call, you had some idea, and then finally it was delivered. Here, there's just, if you contact your MP, it just says, oh, third party. Could be another 2 weeks, could take another 2 years, and so that's why I think people do file mandamuses. So I don't know if the definition of espionage is going to be dealt with, and I'm not sure. I think there's a division between certain judges in the federal court where I think some are becoming increasingly more restrictive, and others say, we have not just with espionage, but with respect to mandamus applications in general. We know the test is, we know the test for leave is, I'm granting leave, and then somebody's going to hear it. But others are saying, no, you're Chinese, you're stuck in security. We have enough on our plate now. So, yeah, those are sort of my thoughts on this.
I mean, I think that I like what you're saying about, is it because of the mandamus? I agree with you. I don't think the mandamus is creating the security issue. I pretty much echo your thoughts entirely. I want to answer something that was an earlier question you asked Steve about how come we're not seeing a deluge of these cases. I think part of the reason for that, in my view and in my experience, is that some people are getting these super intimidating PFLs, people that are outside Canada, I think, and they're like, whoa, 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 I changed my mind. Like, I wouldn't want to have to face off against this type of a PFL if I didn't really have to, because I think that the idea, and maybe I'm wrong here, I don't have obviously enough statistical evidence to be able to say this in an informed way, but even when we talked to Raj, I mean, my sense was that if somebody was contacting me from overseas and there was any reasonable basis to suspect that they might get a negative decision and they were trying to come as a study permit holder, I'd be like, look, given all the odds you have against you and the fact that even if you were to come, you're going to have a real hard time transitioning to permanent residency, maybe just use your money somewhere else. So
Yeah.
I might just say, like, just pull your application. Don't, like, unless you have tens or hundreds of $1,000s to throw at an education that may never lead to permanent residency. I'm not sure I'm recommending Canada right now. So I think that has slowed the flow of this
Yeah, I don't. It could be
litigation.
that Raymond's case, Lee was the first. I find that hard to believe, but
I don't
I
know.
don't know. I find it really weird that there haven't been any
I think it was the first one that
cases.
moved it into the public eye. And then I think after that, I think it certainly has changed the way I would advise
Yeah,
people.
but like any other refusal on those grounds, for sure would have been judicially reviewed, right? Like if you had a person come to you and say, "I just got refused because they
Yeah,
say
you're
that in the
totally right.
future I'll be a spy," you'd be like, "Okay," and that for sure is getting leave.
I don't know.
Um,
I don't know. I mean, given the political climate in China, if you were just accused of being a spy, you'd be like, yikes. It's like a hot potato. Would you necessarily think to retain? I don't know. I mean,
well,
I'm
yeah,
not
because
sure.
you've now been banned for life, right? Like you're now
But
banned
I
for
think
life for
there is
being a spy.
I think there's something to what Diana is saying. Like I've spoken to a couple of Chinese potential GR applicants who, they want confidentiality orders because,
Yeah,
they're now concerned that they're going to be stuck between Chinese government,
exactly.
mainland,
Yeah.
how they're going to be perceived. And if they're working in an open scientific field, are they going to get a lot of offers on their papers and then, oh, I actually, John Wu is trying to, publish it, but he's been found to be a
Yeah.
spy by Canada, and we're not going to publish it
Yeah,
because
maybe.
There's a lot of
It's
security concerns from those clients, and I don't think that they necessarily want to consider an open public hearing conversation about what might have caused them to be flagged. I don't know. That doesn't strike
if
me
they're
as the
already banned. I mean,
demographic.
that's a good point because Mr. Lee, the University of, I believe it was Waterloo, was contacted to ask, like, oh, why were you hiring a spy? I know Lauren Waldman has a case that was in the news where they were going to a person's neighborhood and knocking on the doors, being like, you know, that house over there that the guy's a spy. What do you think of that?
Hmm.
So there is
Mm.
an element to
Yeah,
that.
it's
Maybe I
very,
still am not convinced that that fully explains why
Well,
there
it's going to
haven't been
happen.
any other
It's definitely
cases.
going to happen. Like I do have a case right now. Like I
it's going to
told you,
happen for
we
sure.
spoke about it off the record. I don't know if I want this particular fact pattern to try to challenge Lee. I prefer the 10-year, living in Canada with no actual espionage,
For
but we'll
sure.
see if he wants to proceed.
Totally.
Um, so I do have a case right now where, we're getting a supplemental CTR. We converted it from a mandamus to a JR by way of a case conference. We have a good judge. I don't know. I don't know where we'll land on this. I don't even know if you
No,
want to certify this question. I don't know. But
but like,
it will be, it will be decided, I think, by the federal court of appeal in the next couple of years, and then
But like
maybe
over
we'll
the
take.
last even few weeks, I've been regularly consulted by people who are in these situations. And I guess they're hearing me talk about it, but they're like, okay, so tell me what is the best and worst case scenarios. And so I talk them through and they're like, okay. And so for some people, it's very much like, I would rather avoid this type of refusal at all cost. So what would you do? Well, in that case, the answer is you just wait and hope the law changes and that we get
Yeah.
a better, more sympathetic set of facts. And in that case, the answer is clearly you wait. And in the
So now
case of
is not the
somebody,
time.
yeah, if it's
Yeah.
somebody who's like, I think my facts are great, and I think I have some of those cases coming up through the system, came here at age 18, have done nothing at all but gain Canadian education, integrate into the Canadian environment. There's absolutely no basis to suggest an intention to return. Those ones we are cultivating. We need to get some good, we need get some good precedents on the books. And then, but again, the problem is here, and I guess this is something that I've been really wrestling with. Everybody, I think, everybody will say the world is right now broken. And I think because of the precedents that are coming, that the Lee decision, I think everyone is afraid to argue these cases because the staggering precedent that this has set, that like in general terms, it's okay to prohibit somebody's coming into Canada because of the future potential that their
Yeah.
ideas might become radicalized. Like that is scary.
And it's not even that they'll become radicalized, it's that they'll be coerced into giving information.
But it's sort of like it's a strange reaction to a fascist state. If what we're saying is that because that state might be coercive, that we're criminalizing the people
Well,
who
no, and I
might be
tweeted this saying
coerced.
it's
Like,
very
so
weird that the
confusing.
reaction, that the concern is they may go back to China and divulge information.
So we're
So the
going to
solution
deport
is
them
to send
there.
them back to China. Lev touched upon the
Can
political.
I
Yeah,
just say one more thing there? I think one thing that practitioners should think about is once you're PFL, your withdrawal request is going to be denied. So
Yeah, for
if you think your
sure.
client's going to get PFL,
Very good point.
and then withdraw the application now before they get PFL. I think Will Tao spoke on your program saying, they've asked to withdraw and they were granted. In my view, those are generally not going to be granted.
No, I
Case law
agree
says once
100%.
public policy is triggered, you're likely going to be denied. I
Yeah.
recently had one where, anyhow, we filed a withdrawal request. It was well documented, etc. We made JR it, but it was not granted. This was somebody who worked in the KGB. Well, not worked. He served in a military, the border sort of, where there were troops that were under the KGB in whatever it is, 1962 or whatever the year was. And we said, look, just allow him to withdraw. He's never going to come to Canada. But once you ban him, the mom, who is like 70 and has recovered from cancer, will never be able to see her kids unless she's TRP. Then she's probably not going to get TRP. So just allow him to withdraw. Nope, a
Yeah.
ban and so on. So,
Yeah.
Stephen, you're going to say something.
It's a really
Well,
important point, though, that they will not rest until he's on every no-fly list.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
And yeah, it's
So the
Yeah.
political situation right now and why I think this is only going to get much worse and expand. So like in the past month, we've had the foreign interference report come out, which discusses how international students in Toronto were coerced, from what I understand in the report, by the Chinese consulate into getting on buses to influence a liberal nomination. At the same time, and with that country of ongoing concerns about undercover police stations and the Winnipeg lab issue, where two scientists, it figures, were or it was determined were spying for China. You have allegations about Iranian agents interfering with the CPC nomination, also in Toronto. India has been accused of hiring, I think it's now four individuals, all foreign nationals, three of whom I think were international students, to murder a Sikh activist. And actually, in the foreign intelligence report, they said they're actually, contrary to what all the hype had been, there actually isn't that much evidence of any Russian interference. So in the current climate, with all of those concerns growing and mounting, do you only see it? Like, do you agree with me that this is only going to get worse and that there's not going to be a political appetite to do anything to speed up screening?
I agree. I think it's only going to get worse. I think that when we decided to bring in 500,000 people, a year plus whatever it is, another million between visitors and between workers and students, there should have been a lot more thought given to how we're going to screen people, because we were sort of just focusing on population growth and short-term economic gains and so on. And I don't think the security apparatus was properly funded. Again, Stephen, you'd probably know more about this, but when IRCC says we got another 85 million to hire whatever it is, however many workers, is there a corresponding budget increase for CISIS, CBSA, and so on? Are they being trained better and so on? So I think it's only going to get worse. I think the court, unfortunately, will probably become more restrictive because they're saying, look, it's a failing system. I'm going to defer to this failing system as opposed to letting this Russian grandfather in or Chinese student in or whoever. So it's probably only going to get worse in the short term until I think we understand where we sort of land with this sort of new, again, deglobalizing sort of world. We're still economically tied together, but in terms of a broader move towards liberal and liberalism based principles, I think that is now receding. And we're seeing essentially guilt by association type of an approach, which to me
Hmm.
is the quintessential anti-Western, anti-liberal, anti-democratic
Mm,
sort of notion. This is not what the West is supposed to stand for. And the Lee decision, another decision, essentially encapsulate that. We're not going to do an individual assessment. Guilt by association is fine, and it could be fine, but how
mm,
far do you push it? So I do think it's only going to get worse in terms of
And
delays.
I think the
totally.
political risk falls on letting people in. And the example that I would give is I can't remember the name of the decision, but there was a mandamus that was granted for an Iranian individual who the federal court granted mandamus. In the decision, it referenced how Pierre Polyev had written a letter of support for this person asking IRCC to speed up the security screening. The mandamus is ordered. An element of the Iranian diaspora community here then pointed out that this person was the child of someone involved in that acronym that I always screw up, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And
Hmm.
they were blasting Polyev for writing the support letter. And then the minister came out and, in what you almost never see, tweeted that they had just refused the individual and that they weren't going to let people like this in. And the fact that, you know, Polyev ultimately gets pilloried for having encouraged faster security screening, I just don't see where there's political upside. Lev talked earlier about, how it's weird that the bureaucracy seems to be inventing laws, which is a whole other topic that we've
Yeah, for
addressed,
sure.
which is where is the what 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 do the politicians think of what's going on? Do they know about what's going on? I really have
Yeah,
no idea.
I don't think they do, and I think that's the problem. A lot of it is we're going to see right now an overreaction. Is we were sort of, and I was thinking about if this isn't appropriate, but I come from a culture where alcoholism is sort of and just sort of this abstract disdain for life is in some way a part of it, where you wake up on the third day of your sort of drunken sort of escapade, and all of a sudden there are people in your apartment. What the hell? How did they get here? So we kind of woke up in the middle of 2023. Oh my God, we're having interference. We have we have Chinese police stations. We have people being bussed. We have actual interference. We have our own party members who are being monitored or coerced. Now what we're going to do is we're going to, implement a bunch of laws that restrict sort of
mm,
democratic principles in order to protect without maybe getting to the underlying issues. So I think we're kind of like, this is sort of like a rude awakening that,
mm,
and there should have been planning for this. And I don't think we were. We're always reacting. I have not seen
sure.
any sort of policy that was there. And I was writing to my MP prior to the Russian invasion. I was writing about Belarus. I was writing about things in Russia that were happening, and in terms of how the West was being coerced and it was being undermined from within and so on. Zero responses, nothing, nobody cared. And all of a sudden we wake up and realize, oh, well, the powers were actually trying to, sort of, I guess, what do you want to call it, destabilize the world order, the sort of the peace dividend we
Hmm.
got, after World
Mm,
War II and so on. So I think it's only going to get worse. And I think we had a rude awakening. And I don't see any serious politicians, unfortunately, not Pierre Poilievre, not Justin Trudeau, nobody there on the front who can stand up and speak to us like adults, as
right.
opposed to hiding behind the technocratic matrix and saying, look, we live in a difficult and complex world, and security is really important, and we're going to possibly overwrite some principles, but we're going to review this every 2 years or every 5 years or everywhere else to make sure that Canada is Canada and not a state where CISs can,
And what's also wild to
No,
me
wait,
is
can
that,
I don't
yeah,
want to move off of that for a second because I think I love everything that you said there, Lev, but I think to me, the fact that security is still being looked at as the primary, like that's the primary machinery. It's always looked at through a lens of like, these are our things, we need to keep them safe from everybody else, rather than looking at it as a nation building exercise. Like, what are the things that are like our yeses, as opposed to like, not this, not that, stop this, screen against that, and I feel like that's what feels so discombobulated to me, like this was some of the things that we talked about at the conference. Like if we shared borders with all of the places all around us and things just arrived, we would need to figure out like what was an actual strategy for how porous would this be? How would we integrate? How would we respond? As opposed to just like, let's just prevent people from arriving and then figure out what all the strategies are to hold people out. But I agree with you about the part that like, can we just have the conversation from a first principle standpoint? What is the goal that we are trying to get at? And then trying to be like, okay, this is what we're hoping to achieve and go from there. I feel like nobody's thinking about that conversation started from that standpoint and then trying to operationalize. And I feel sort of like, it's kind of like when we talk about inadmissibility, like at what point does somebody just become our problem when the criminal behavior is homegrown? At what point is it not about like who shouldn't have appeal rights, who should be deported, who should be never permitted to come back, but rather like at what point is it like that's our problem?
yeah. I
We've
mean, they may
created the
say that the way
environment.
to avoid it of becoming homegrown is to not let them in the first place.
Maybe, but like let's actually talk
But
about
in
that
terms
then.
of that conversation, like in the whole stumbling in, it is right now we've stumbled in, I would say, to this expanded definition of espionage where we don't know what the limits are. The government, as far as that adult conversation, insists on posting a global processing time for study permits, which
Mm.
we know is not
It's
the
not
case.
true. It's bullshit. But
Yeah.
also, like when we say the thing about like, okay, well, let's let in this many temporary foreign workers or this many students and then this many visitors, and then be like, oh no, but only this many can stay, and we're not going to tell you which ones at the beginning and all this. Oh, look, now we've got this housing crisis. It's like, did you really think people were going to come and invest in this Canadian education and then not wish to stay? Like, why are we pretending that these problems aren't going to be there in the
But
future?
that's
Like
again that has to do with actual coherent policy and think
coherent policy.
because we are primarily
Coherent.
concerned with, I think we're largely concerned or substantively concerned. I don't know like what term to use with short-term economic benefit, right?
Right.
You can have either an economy driven by innovation, productivity, build certain areas and so on, or we can say, look, there's a huge demand for Canada, and we can just bring people in. They're cheaper. They will sort of plug in the gap, and forget integration, forget nation building, forget
Yeah,
everything else. Those things
exactly.
matter. As long as our employers are sort of
Now we can
happy.
fund our
And
schools. Now they can offer
yeah, but
reasonable
what
tuition to
funding them
domestic students.
for? Their
Who
diploma mills.
knows?
What funding them for? And this is where anyhow, I think Steve wanted to take the conversation to a
Yeah.
different dimension.
Yeah.
Oh, just in terms of that foreign interference inquiry, there was an act passed in response to it. I actually thought that they were going to make um, people who engage in foreign interference a specific ground of inadmissibility. And I thought we'd be talking today about whether all the students who voted en masse to influence the nomination, whether they knew that's what they were doing or not, by voting would now be inadmissible. But instead, they passed a very narrow amendment to the way judicial reviews are done, whereby previously in judicial review, one of the advantages of it over, say, an Access to Information Act request was that you would get a lot more information in a judicial review about what was going on behind the scenes. Pretty much everything except matters related to national security or things that endangered the safety of a person.
Mm.
That is now being expanded so that the government doesn't have to disclose, in addition to those two things, information that would harm Canadian national defense and international relations. So they're, in international relations is actually a pretty broad one because that could be, in theory, if somebody is refused because the United States provided information about a previous refusal,
Mm,
that info would now possibly never need to be disclosed to the person in judicial review.
mm.
I'm curious to know your thoughts on this upcoming amendment, which hasn't yet passed. Um, and also what you think it has to do with the foreign interference inquiry and like
Oh
what it
my
has to do
God.
with foreign interference. It almost seems like they was just take advantage of an opportunity.
I can't answer the second question, but I can say that like the whittling down of information that is available in the context of everything and how much we need to work in order to just get basic information just seems to be always increasing. Just the number of steps in general, just to like, I just want to submit an extra document. And now that takes 30 steps when it used to just be like, here you go,
Hmm.
a fax, a phone call. Can I just add this? Like I feel like it's like death by a thousand cuts. And so like automation, in my view, was supposed to make everything more accessible. Just upload to here, not upload and then, no, first of all, shrink it to an impossibly small size, and then in only a specific format and only with a specific program, and then upload it and then submit it and then make sure that they've received it, and sometimes the slot's not there. Like everything is just so incredibly laborious, and then trying to get a copy back, you have to do this, and then like, so anyways, that's just my rant on that.
In the last episode with Martin Levine, former visa officer, he was saying that he would also expand it so that any investigative techniques never need to be disclosed. And we were talking about refusals that just say your document has been verified to be false and
Yeah,
whether they need to ever provide anything more than that. And it was interesting to see his perspective, which was that should be sufficient. The investigative technique should never need to be disclosed
yeah,
to maintain integrity.
yeah, to get back,
Well,
like to have to wait so many months to get back just the basic notes with so many redactions that just to me are just like, really, like
Yeah.
but I think there has to be. I recently put this in my factor, but I said deference must be earned. This bureaucratic
there you
apparatus
go.
has not earned deference. I'm
Right.
I
sorry.
like it.
Yeah, I
You've
love that.
stumbled
Peter
into
Edelman
this,
used to have a similar type
Yeah.
line.
because I sometimes I do so many of this that I say, and maybe I overstep the line, but that if it takes us 2 years to determine whether somebody who's never worked in China, whose
Yeah,
entire public profile is online, to screen him for security, we don't have a hope in hell in actually
honestly.
protecting us from people who actually want to come here with nefarious actions, right? If it takes us 2 years. So deference must be earned.
Yeah.
And our bureaucratic apparatus is stumbling from embarrassment to disaster to,
Yeah.
it's always reacting and so on. So when we are looking at the amendments, we have to look at them, well, okay, the amendments may be beneficial to national security,
Mm.
but what we may need for national security is maybe some sort of a review, like a national review of every 5 years. We review national security matters, and I think that those
Do
are one of
you?
the amendments.
No, wait,
So
but there's something else here, which is that the onus of proof on the department is getting so much lower, and the onus of proof on the applicant is getting so much higher. Like what they seem to be saying in all enforcement type activities is that it's too hard to make the department prove actual espionage. So just the fact that they can show that that government's bad and that person knows stuff, that's enough. But if we want to disprove it, like the onus of proving that there's no reasonable grounds for them to make that, like we need to disprove international politics, like, and they have the resources of the state and we have the resources of a legal aid tariff. Are you joking? Like, it's like, talk about a Sisyphean battle. Like, it's impossible for us to win. And I do feel like this is why we are sitting here like with exasperation quoting Kafka to the judges, because like it's impossible for us to win these arguments.
So for those who don't know what a Sisyphean battle is, I have looked it up And it is the story of that person who has to roll an immense boulder up a hill only for it to roll down every time.
Yeah, that's my life. Welcome to my life. It's not a joke. Like it's really, and I'm sort of like, are you joking? This is how I read the reasons. It's reasonable. That's a reasonable exercise of discretion.
And it wouldn't be necessarily problematic. Again, if the system showed itself to be functioning, to be preemptive, to be thoughtful, to be agile, to be transparent and mature, to be run by true professionals, we can say, well, you know what, we live in dangerous times. We're going to curtail some disclosure requirements. You know, the world is a complex place.
Yeah.
I get it, but
Yeah.
they're
This
they're they're
person
now
is
introducing
scary.
changes.
This little
Yeah.
kid, this little kid who, like that's who you're saying this about? You sure? Okay.
So to what
And the other
extent,
problem is,
like,
where does it stop, right? Because
I don't
then
know. I don't know.
one guy commented on my LinkedIn post. He says, "You're always writing about China, Russia, and whatever cases that you're dealing with." Which, by
Yeah.
the way, I detest the Putin regime.
Yeah.
Detest it. I want him, in Hague, in jail, his whole regime. I have no love for China. It's a subversive state, and so on. I take on those cases because democratic principles must be defended. We
Totally.
must have some degree of procedural fairness and so
Yeah.
on. And I responded to this person by saying, because one day, you don't want to wake up in Russia or China and so on. And it
Totally.
starts slowly, and maybe I'm being overly dramatic, but
No,
one
no.
day you may be PR living here for 5 years.
Yeah.
Somebody comes in and says, well,
so
actually,
And this
you're
is the thing that I
attributing
said at the
this
beginning.
to
The little kid who was born in Gaza is not Hamas. And that's
yeah,
why
I
I
mean
think,
that we
like
talked about offline,
off
so no one will
camera.
know what no one will know what you're referencing. The so it sounds like and this is what happens when there's complete silence, that Lev is attributing a little bit of this to just incompetence in security screening. Do you think it may just be malice that they have decided we can never politically and publicly say that we don't want applicants from these countries. So instead, we will just make it so slow that the schools stop issuing letters of acceptance because they won't ever get study permits, and that the companies will just stop offering job offers to people
well,
from these countries.
It's already
Do you
happening.
attribute it to, do you think that there is an element of that in this, that it's just conspiracy thinking?
well, but hold on. I mean, talking about the amendments, I haven't reviewed the amendments in great detail, but they do seem to curtail sort of procedural rights, transparency. Those are important sort of principles, and the principle of proportionality and sort of the imbalance of power is also there. And we have to be sort of mindful of them.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I assume it's in part, but I assume that Canadian spy
I'm not
agents
attributing
left
them
out of
to
stuff or something.
I'm not
But
attributing them to incompetence. I am attributing them to this fear. Like, look, our apparatus is not working that well. We need more powers. We need to give our investigative bodies more powers. We need to protect them. We need to protect the sources, and we need to say, "You're bad. You're not coming in," type of thing. I think that's what's happening in part. With respect to the delays, I think they're absolutely being waited out, and I think what the Lee decision did is allowed them to just openly come out and say, well, hold on, we don't need to wait them out. Just say, look, you went to school A is bad, and you're now guilty by association because you're in
Yeah.
STEM, and you may in some future be coerced into something, even though this presumes, again, coercion within Canada. So we're saying we're not able to protect you here in Canada, China is so powerful and so on. So I think there's absolutely some malice there, and I'd be interested to see behind the scenes, again, like you say, when somebody's writing this book, in some island after World War III, they're publishing this on Twitter, and
Yeah.
they're saying, actually, there was a directive that came in saying China plus this school gets weighted out, put it at the bottom of the
Yeah.
screening pile, wait for 2 years because no school is going to give you deferral for more than 2 years, then you're done. Case solved.
Yeah. I just think history always repeats itself, and that when, like, we are on this perpetual pendulum swing between extremism and neoliberalism, and I think that when people, like, a huge trauma occurs and then people swing in the other direction and start retaliating against another community, then there's a recognition, a huge apology, and then we go back and do it again. Truth and reconciliation, denial, perpetrating new genocide. back again, and so I think the thing is that like there in each one of those phases there are those who are like, people, we're doing it again. And so I think that like I don't think that there's an intentional desire to do it, but I think that like right now Canada is in an era of no. And so the thing that I keep sort of why I'm litigating like until I'm blue in the face is like, can we just slow down a second and just figure out
No,
like
that's the thing. They have slowed
why?
down. I'm just kidding.
Exactly. But like, just look at this and let's think critically about like, are we okay with these categorical decisions when we haven't really thought through why is this a no? Why is doing science while Chinese? Why is that now a criminalized thing? Like, not saying that we wish to have no security screening, but like, what is the actual nexus between the harm we're trying to weed out and the machinery we're using for it? Because I think we're way off the mark. And I'm trying to, I would like for everyone to be motivated to try and spare us that future apology.
And I think
You're
the machinery
optimistic.
behind it,
I
I
am
would
very
be,
optimistic.
if again, if we had a serious conversation, we said, look, the world is a dark, difficult, and complex place, and we're going to create a broad security policy. This policy is actually going to say, if you attended the following schools, if you have the following ties, etc., you're not coming in. Now we're going to get a lot of great people who have no ties. We're not going to come in, but we're making the judgment call because
Yeah.
we would rather have in the criminal context a guilty man walk than an innocent man be convicted. Here we're reversing it for purposes of national security. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Be transparent, be open,
At the very least, yeah.
as opposed to this section 34(1)(a) or F abuse. So another thing,
Pretending.
what guys are we engaged with? Like going back, I immigrated here 1997, very different country, nation building versus just quotas and numbers. This very technocratic approach, a more splintering sort of society, and we're not really having a conversation about that. I mean, the idea of nation building has I think been long sort of like extinguished in some way. It's only there in IRPA and nobody else, or nowhere else. And I think we can also have a conversation about that because all we're doing is we're talking about the numbers, more numbers, less numbers.
Yeah.
But
It's
is there
funny you
more
should
to this?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. A friend of mine was commenting, who watches a lot of hockey, that yesterday was the first time that he had remembered in years that that CBC Canadian Heritage Minute was back. And he went, "Oh, nation building. That's all of a sudden a thing again. I thought we were
Oh
past that."
God.
Anyway,
Oh
I'm just
no.
looking at the time. We've once again gone beyond our
Of
hour.
course we have.
Lev, speaking of history being cyclical, we look forward to having you on to discuss this again.
100%.
And
Thank you.
yeah.